So I would like to start out because I have a really funny story about that whole comment section. Um, I am gay. I am uh, non-binary, and when I saw that post, it made me very happy. Well, the post itself, because it was like, yes, I agree. Yes, I've seen so many people hurt in my community, people I love hurt, and it's hurtful and embarrassing because I am a social worker as well, of course. Um, and the comments in the section were hurtful. It felt very invalidating to me, and I saw that it was very invalidating to other people. And there was one comment in particular that was very upsetting. And to start out, I want to say that if somebody comes and, like, for instance, there was a comment that said something like, I would need to see statistics about this, or whatever, because I'm not familiar with this problem. And people responded and said, this is a problem, this is what I've seen. And that individual responded with, okay, I'm really sorry that that's happening, I wasn't aware of it. And that's beautiful, I love it. um, However, there was another comment that just said, oh, really? Is that, she said, oh, really? Because I'm a social worker, and that's absolutely false. And so when that happens, I'm less accommodating to people. And my response was, oh, really? Because I'm a gay social worker, and that's absolutely true. And then I said, check your cishet white privilege. And another social worker came in and started yelling at me and telling me that I was um, uh, judgmental and, um, you know, all these different things about how terrible of a person I am. And then they reported me to Facebook for harassment. And I was given a 30-day ban because I can't keep my mouth shut on other things. So that's why I'm up to 30 days. And so the irony of a post about social workers hurting the LGBT community and a social worker hurting somebody from the LGBT community is just mind-boggling. Um, and I had somebody else after, of course, it was after I got my 30-day ban, so I couldn't respond to it. I had somebody else tell me that I was using a slur when I said cis shit. And it's ironic to me because it's literally a portmanteau of cis and heterosexual. So you're cisgender and heterosexual. That's literally all that is. And the fact that they were telling me that I was using a slur was just infuriating. So, I mean, like I said, I've seen so many people hurt. I live in Indiana, and it's embarrassingly backward. Um, it's just horrifying, and um, I don't need people to tell me that I'm wrong when I'm seeing it and I'm dealing with it. And so that's my story for you.
I want to thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. And I think it's horrifying how it's so acceptable for other social workers to speak without the lived experiences of what we're talking about. Um, my name is Felix. I use they, them pronouns. I am one of the facilitators for this thing. I am also a social worker, not only a queer and trans social worker, but my primary population is queer and trans folks. I'm a therapist. So to 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 have another social worker tell you that your experience doesn't exist is unbelievably painful and unfortunately not surprising. And I think a lot of social workers who are queer or trans, particularly those of us who are queer trans folks of color, um, can share in that experience of understanding that our colleagues are not our allies. And to me, that is incredibly painful. And I could go on and on and on about the ways in which I've personally been harmed by social workers who did not understand my queer identity. But, you know, as a facilitator, I just wanted to introduce myself, affirm exactly what you were saying, and kind of open up to the floor for other folks who had thoughts.
Hi, I'm Dawn. I'm a social worker well, MSW student in Pennsylvania. Our NASW branch is very mild in their approach to things. They're more concerned with lobbying, I think, than any sort of real activism, which is a huge problem for me. So when I came across this post, I was thrilled that somebody was saying it. That it was being put out there, because as part of my journey in my master's degree program, I've had to kind of look back on my professional experience as a child welfare professional and as a public welfare professional, and say, you know, and as a lesbian, not a professional lesbian, but a lesbian, to go and say, you know, where was I supported with my as a person, and where was I supported or not supported in how I thank you, Sarah, and where was I not supported, and how was I not allowed to be supportive as a social worker or as somebody offering social services and being a service provider. And, you know, our systems are not built to support people like that. And when I was a child welfare professional, you know, my office mates and like my coworkers were like very supportive when I came out, but it was basically, you know, said without being said, your clients are not supposed to know about that. Like, that's not a part of your identity when it comes to working with your clients. And of course, you know, it's not necessary maybe when you're walking into somebody's house to announce that you are a homosexual child snatcher, right? But there were many opportunities where I worked with teens and young adults and parents who were struggling to deal with sexual orientation and gender identity issues that really didn't have a national and like more social context the way they do now, because this work was being done in like 2010, you know, an eon ago, really. And to think that, you know, I was being told that my experience was okay as long as I kept it to myself, as long as I didn't provide any authenticity of my own to the people I was supposed to be working with. And that is hugely problematic. And yes, we need to be aware of boundaries. And yes, we need to be, you know, keep, you know, a sense of our professionalism. And we can't just self-disclose because it sounds like fun that day. But as social workers also, and as professionals, we need to be trusted to be able to make those decisions and be supported by our employers and our social structures to do so. Otherwise, we're just continuing to be told to shut up, not make it a big deal. Not everything is about being gay. Well, when you are gay, it is. It's who you are. It's the same as if you wear glasses or you need a wheelchair to get around. That part of you is always a part of you. You don't just turn it on and off. So I will tell you though, I did not look at the comment section for this post because I knew it would be ugly, and we've all got enough of that. So I appreciate the brave folks who were like, I'm going to read the comments, because I don't do that. But I am super interested to hear, and maybe this can be a side conversation or something we take offline, about the comments you made about NASW, the national branch, kind of giving some pushback about this, because I am sick of NASW and would like to know more about how I can sharpen my complaints about them. But I appreciate this opportunity to talk too long about this thing, but I definitely am excited that this conversation is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. And I could go on and on and on about NSAW National. I mean, if we look at just each individual chapter of NSAW, and if you go to their website and make just a search for LGBT or lesbian or gay or trans, over half of the chapters don't have any posts regarding LGBT people. They don't have resources for LGBT individuals. And also, for example, the sorry, I lost my train of thought, but the beyond the NSAW Code of Ethics. So anything beyond the NSAW Code of Ethics regarding LGBTQ individuals, if you did a rudimentary search, you wouldn't be able to find anything on their websites. And that's just unfortunate. So thank you for that, John. And we can definitely take this offline and talk if you would like. And Taylor, I believe you said you'd like to speak next. Feel free to open up and speak.
Hi, everyone. I am Taylor. I've listed some links in below. I am a polysexual, pansexual, and I am a master's social work student. The links that I listed are ways to support that my community personally has taken in a social work aspect. Our city of Marquette, Michigan has a specific no discrimination created by this wonderful trans person named Marissa, who I'm very good friends with. And then we also started, as of last year during the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protest, the Safe Place pledge, which I have listed in those links. I am really disheartened by people not realizing where social work harm can come from based on that post, especially because all of us get discriminated against all the time. I have a transgender nephew. I have two sisters who won't kiss out in public because they live in a big city and they're fearful. My family lives in a community that's not so accepting, and we've been called the F word, just screamed at us recently. So I get the distress, but I hope that maybe these links can be something you guys can suggest to your people in your communities, your colleges, implement them, because it was a college group, the Social Justice for Us, that started these Safe Place pledges. And you can visit those. They've been really good. We've had a lot more accepting businesses, and it also kind of let us know where to give our business to. Bath and Body Works, I know, joined it here, and they also have a national pledge, which is nice. So there's some safe places out there. And I know in the student field, they are actually, at least at my college through North Central University, putting a large effort into understanding the LGBTQ struggle with an emphasis on transgender and persons of color. So hopefully with that new education that's out, because my school redoes their stuff about every 3 years, we'll have more social workers that are more knowledgeable about the marginalized population. That's all I had really to say. Thank you.
So thank you for sharing that. Sorry, I was chewing, so I wanted to give it a bit of time. I want to say that if you do want to speak and you are a member of the LGBTQ community, there are several ways you can do that. You can jump in when there's a space to jump in, just like now, like I did. And also a convenient way to do it, especially if you have a thought after someone else or from what other people are saying. If you go down to the reactions button on the bottom, there's a raise hand feature, and I just did it for myself. So, and that way everybody knows who wants to speak next. So Zoom does a little bit of that if that's a way you want to do it as well. So I just wanted to share that, and then also share that anytime anyone wants to jump in, they can do so. So I want to kind of open up the floor again after, thank you, Taylor, for sharing that. It sounds, I don't know how often my school, revisited the curriculum, but I did not see any of those revisions or anything. So it sounds hopeful that people are actually taking into account the queer experience, because I certainly did not get that when I was a student, which was very recently. So I wanted to again open up the floor for anybody who had thoughts about the post, or in general. A question that I always, not just about our thoughts about the post, but like, in what ways do allies, and for anybody who can't see me, allies is in huge air quotes here, allies, how do they harm our community? What potential do they have to harm our community? Because when we say ally, it seems like they could possibly do no harm. So I'm kind of opening it up and wondering what folks' experiences are and what their thoughts are about it.
So my name is Lucia. I'm a non-binary therapist in private practice in Georgia, live in the Metro Atlanta area. And I found that the school that I went through, if they had not allowed me to make a place, no place would have been held for me. Like, I had to give them information and accurate, like, sources for talking about LGBTQ plus issues. I was the only voice of lived experience, which is to be expected sometimes, but also, had I not spoken up or been there, it would have gone unsaid. It would have been unaddressed, that much more than it already is. And then after school, when I graduated in 2017, I found that there are agencies within the state of Georgia where it's okay to, like it was mentioned earlier by Dawn, like it's kind of, it's considered inappropriate to share this information. And I've had that told to my face by supervisors. And when I was outed, the company, they kind of shook the finger at me instead of at the client. So there's definitely a lot to be said for the places that employ us, the places that educate social workers. And like in the state of Georgia, I am blessed to live in the small spot of blue that is Atlanta, but it does not get addressed. And as far as I know, this is the best experience to have in the Southeast. That's probably saying something. And I would also love to know other ways to get involved with, like, bringing this more attention, because it's obviously very salient across multiple states and the country, I feel.
Thank you. Dory?
Hi, my name is Dory. I am a social worker in New York City. And I wanted to speak on the idea of allies. New York City is chock full of self-identified allies. And I think that it's all kinds of self-identified allies, people who identify as queer and trans and gender diverse allies, people who identify as anti-racist allies, or allies of people of the global majority, or, you know, fat allies, or disability, you know, people with different abilities allies, you know, just everybody likes to call themselves an ally. And I think that the harm comes from, this is very reductionist. Also, please excuse the yelling you're going to hear in the background. I have a 1-year-old. But I think, you know, if there was a punchline, it would be that the harm comes from the protection that people that I self-identify as being an ally feel like that label gives them, that then they don't have to do any actual work on themselves to, you know, check in with the people that they say they're allying with, that they don't have to elevate the voices of the people they say they're allying with, that they don't have to step back and you know, let other people speak. They don't have to look at themselves and their own implicit or explicit biases. So I think that when I saw the post and I saw the comments, the thing that struck me was that it was not surprising to see a bunch of social workers commenting in a way that was super defensive and savioristic and fragile. Because as a social worker, I find social workers often to be that way, because there's something about, again, this sort of label of social work that you're taught that you can't be, you know, you can't be homophobic, you can't be transphobic, you can't be racist because you're a social worker. As though there's something about deciding to be a social worker that, you know, eliminates all of your lived experiences or personal biases, and excludes you or excuses you from having to do any real work on yourself. And so in my mind, to me, that's the struggle that I see with a lot of social workers, is that getting that social work degree is the first and last thing people sometimes do in their journey towards quote unquote allyship.
Taylor, you can just jump in.
Okay, so to piggyback on what Dory was saying, I have a question for the group, because this is something my college requires as part and dedicates an entire week to, about our implicit biases, to show even though you are a social worker, you can have an implicit bias of being racist, transphobic, homophobic. Is that something new to the social work track, or did everyone get that type of education? And that's just a general question of the group. And then I also commented, a big thing I see allies doing, is saying, oh, I'm fine with trans people, I have a trans friend, and then they get angry at a worker who is trans. I actually had this conversation today, and I had to explain to this guy, I don't care if your friend is trans, you purposely misgendered that person at their place of work, you were being belligerent, they had every right to refuse you service, and they feel they were in the right, and they feel they are still an ally. And I find that ridiculous. So piggybacking on what Dory and what you had to say, I'm sorry, there's so many names.
Chris? Oh, I might have said your name wrong. I read it very quickly. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. You can go ahead. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it.
Oh, you're good. Um, You're good. Sorry, apparently it crashed.
I know I can hear you now if you want to continue.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. I guess Zoom gave up. Just that coming from a really rural, small town, conservative area, and then coming to Columbus, I noticed that, you know, there were a lot more, you know, inclusive people and, you know, inclusive places, but some of that bias and some of the like underlying, you know, pressure to like, oh, you know, we don't say that here or whatever, still continues to be a thing. And it especially has been coming from like like I work at a mental health crisis agency, and our managers are like, oh yeah, we're gonna put rainbow stickers on things and we're gonna be inclusive, but then turn around and have been really, really nasty to, you know, a lot of staff that identify as that. And so there's this really weird, like, you know, I guess collision where they're like, oh yeah, we're super inclusive, but then you're totally not. And especially I think with the older crew, that there's just a really weird undercurrent. And it also is something that kind of happened at OSU as well, where OSU is so big. They're like, oh yeah, of course, we have like 8 different LGBT groups and we're like super hip. But they were so big and so, you know, oh, we're awesome, that they didn't want to actually do any of the work to like keep working on things. They just were content saying, oh, we're gigantic and we have people and power and money and whatever. And so I think that's something that is a trap that we can fall into as well, of like, oh, hey, some place is finally being not super homophobic or transphobic, and we can just be thankful that it's like a bare minimum. So it can be hard to be like wanting to keep pushing it forward when it's like really, really exhausting to deal with it. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I said it in the chat, but I can reiterate that the amount of times someone has told me, oh, this space is inclusive, oh, we're inclusive, and I walk in and I'm like, nope, no thanks, is really really ridiculous. And I think it happens a lot in universities, which is exactly where our social workers are supposed to be created, trained, learning, growing. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Jennifer, you have your hand up.
Hi, so I am an MSW student, and first I wanted to say I was kind of shocked by the post. It reeked a lot of not all social workers or, you know, fake news. And there was a lot of, I'm not going to attend because I'm offended. So I'm wondering, you know, where's all the self-reflection at? Where's all the managing our personal biases at? We're all taught that even if we're not educated in LGBTQ issues. So I actually have quite a long reply on the one, I think it's on Facebook. But as far as, I think it was Taylor who had asked about what other people's schools are like. So I am also in the South. I'm in North Carolina, and I feel lucky that I'm in Charlotte, I'll just say. So I'm in a metro area. My school is very progressive. And of course, it is trying to be so. We have all the LGBTQ groups, like some other people were saying, we have our own lounge. I do give them props for LGBTQ issues being a big focus in a lot of classes. And it's primarily welcoming, and people are there typically willing to learn. It is, I feel kind of privileged to be in a space that's fairly safe. But I will say that the textbooks have been a problem for me. And I'm going back and I'm looking at the dates, right? Oh, this is like 20 years old. No, it's like 5 years old. It was revised 5 years ago. And it's saying the A in LGBTQIA stands for ally. So then I have to give a big explanation on how allyship is not a sexual orientation. Allies shouldn't be centering themselves in marginalized group. It's erasing ace arrow identities, so on. And then I usually get, thank you for telling us that. Maybe you could send an email. And then continuing to use those problematic books. One that really floored me was one that used an example of an acceptable personal value as disagreeing that, as it said, the gays and lesbians should be permitted not only to adopt, but to have custody of their own children. I'll say I'm a solo parent, so that also resonated with me, that would be considered an acceptable personal value, rather than going against our code of ethics, because it is a violation of human rights, right? It's an attempt to take away fundamental human rights and civil liberties. So that textbook is pretty problematic, and I was pretty disappointed. I guess I was naive going into a social work program and not expecting to see something like that. So I come from, my background is I was an intervention specialist in a public school system in rural North Carolina. And so my sexuality was something that I checked at the door there. And I announced in every class I'm in that I will no longer do so here. So there's a lot of me feeling the need pretty much every day to educate people, which is pretty exhausting. And even in what I consider probably one of the most progressive programs that I could probably be in, there are microaggressions, including from professors, people who are private practice owners. You don't look like a lesbian. No offense, but, I love gay clubs, just you better not ask me to dance, things like that. So it's been an interesting ride so far.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Aaron, you have your hand up.
Yeah, my name's Aaron, and I live in probably one of the tiniest little towns in southwestern Virginia, and I'm a professor at Ferrum College, and I probably shouldn't say its name, but I just did. And we are a tiny, tiny, tiny school. Our senior class of BSW social workers has a whopping 8 students. So, we're tiny. I'm still working on my PhD at the University of Kentucky's social work program. And I have to say that amazingly, the 3 programs that I've been involved with, Radford University, University of Kentucky, and now Ferrum College, have all been, for me, surprisingly accepting and inclusive, and have been very willing to educate and change things and work to make changes. And I've even had good experiences with both NASW Kentucky and NASW Virginia, which have been great. So I'm giving props to these places because they've been good, and I think they deserve them. This morning, I spent my morning back at Radford University talking to a health and human professions course about being transgender. And I know there's a lot of pushback on us having to do the educating all the time, but that's part of who I am and what I do. So I don't mind doing that. And yes, we're all tired. And I agree, I'm tired too. God, I'm tired. But I also see it as as long as I've got the energy to go and I can make my life accessible to somebody else, that's what I'm going to do. So, my experience has been very different than what appears to be for everybody else. And for those of you, I'm terribly, terribly sorry. I can honestly say that I'm about 99% certain that my first social work job out of my MSW, I was fired for being transgender, and then pretty much blackballed for every agency within 3 hours. So, anytime there was a call for a reference or whatever, somehow, some way, even though the references I chose were all very, very supportive of me, somehow after they got my references, I was no longer a candidate for the position, which really sucked. Which is why I ended up in grad school getting a PhD. But to give the one comment that I was going to give back when we started talking about the post, I found the post because one of my former classmates responded to the post with, "Are you serious? Because MSWs and social workers are the most caring, accepting, loving people that we have," or something to that effect. And I sat there going, oh God, I just want to shake my head, because yeah, we're supposed to be, but we don't always do a very good job of it. And, I live in this little, if this were considered a pocket of blue, it would be a microdot, because the area all around me is scarlet red. There are still Trump signs in everybody's front yard, and one supporting Trump in 2024. Yeah. And, it's a pain, and it's scary, and it's terrifying for me some days to leave my house or leave campus, because that's just where I live. But, it's also terrifying for my students to go out and leave campus and leave their homes and venture out into this ugly, ugly world, even if they're cishet and just people of color. And we have a lot of them. But aside from that, the thing that most got my attention a few months ago, I was sitting in on one of the CSWE new EPAS guidelines about, all the changes they're making for 2022. And they were reading through all of the non-discrimination parts and how they have to more strongly support differences and stuff. And the only differences that they were talking about were differences in race. And while I am totally and completely in agreement with the fact that we need to do things in association with changing the way we feel and teach and learn about race and racial issues, we can't do that to the exclusion of LGBTQ or any other of the different minorities. And so that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I don't feel like I have enough of a voice with CSWE, because I've been a social work educator now for a year, to try to say that we need to make these changes. And people, you've been on this committee for I don't know how long, and you don't see this. So I'm glad that this forum is happening, so that, there's a stronger voice and a committee here that can go out and say, CSWE, NASW, thanks a whole lot for saying we need to strengthen these issues, but don't forget about us. So I rambled a whole lot there, and I'm very sorry for that. My brain's going kind of crazy today. But anyway, thanks for listening.
Aaron, there's no need to apologize. There wasn't a ramble. Completely agree with everything you said. And I just wanted to add, particularly with CSWE, and I said this a couple of town halls ago, or maybe even the first town hall, that CSWE accreditates schools that allow for Title IX federal exemptions to discriminate against LGBTQ people. So to me, it makes sense that they didn't include that because they're already outwardly accrediting social work schools within these universities that don't allow LGBT students or don't allow faculty to be LGBTQ, and sometimes even discriminate based on gender and sex or sexual orientation. So it's something that we're working on addressing. Definitely, and our special interest groups, which just to let everyone know, every week after we do town halls, we do have a special interest group. It's typically the next Tuesday, and we go through everything that we're working on to actually act on the discussions that we're having in our town halls. So if you are LGBTQ and within this and the plus on that, you're all more than welcome to attend those. And I believe the next person whose hand was raised is Nicholas.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. I am in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, so maybe like 2 hours away from DC, but 2.5 hours away from my closest chapter and 5 hours away from my the capital and where the main chapter is. So I'm kind of in the Alaska of the West Virginia area. They, them identify as non-binary. I do a lot of male presenting and I identify as pan. I run a practice in the Eastern Panhandle. I am a clinically licensed independent social worker. That's whatever West Virginia has. And something that I've really been blessed to have is when I did my master's program, the person who taught our diversity classes, our sex and gender classes, was what I would call an authentic ally, somebody who was interested, knew what they were talking about, and are a part of the community through friends, family, you know, their own connections. And I was lucky enough to be able to, over time, when they had to go take a sabbatical, I was given the opportunity to teach an undergrad class at Shepherd University for sex and gender. And that was kind of the crash course education of what does it mean to get into this work and in my own identity. And from there, I have a private practice over the last few years where I do general outpatient mental health, but I also focus on doing letters and therapy and trying to do gender affirming services. And West Virginia is fascinating because there's always been this relational aspect. And in some of the anti-racist work I've been hearing about over the summer, something that really stuck with me was this idea of we want this work to be relational, connecting with others, versus it being transactional, having to have transactions between people. And I think that that's a lot of what as social workers we miss in terms of allyship. There's this idea of management in institutions thinking, well, we did this, we supported you on this month, or we did this training, so we're good, right? And versus actually building relationships and having connections. Our NASW conference, we do it every year, and it's held in Charleston. So luckily, you know, I was able to do it online this year. We didn't have those capacities due to everything going on. And it's been great because whenever I couldn't make it, there was always some kind of, you know, community class. But something that we all recognize is a lot of those classes are just 101 classes, just skirting by and saying, oh, we're going to go over definitions for an hour and a half and maybe answer those questions. And I think what the real challenge is, training is expected from us in the community. And because it can be exhausting and it can be even at times traumatic, I think one of the things allies can really do to be authentic allies is to take up that mantle of doing adequate, important trainings that are valid, so we don't have to be there and we don't have to be the people necessarily being the only voice and the only area. And I'm lucky to see that. I've seen some great authentic allies, and I've seen some great people in the community continue to teach the sex and gender class so that we don't have to worry. We worry less about the politics that come with it or somebody's rhetoric or stance. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm in West Virginia. You know, I saw this article, we have a listserv, well, I saw this town hall, and I read the initial post and I went, okay, you're doing good. I like this. I can handle this. I wonder what my colleagues would be able to handle. So I actually went in and I went to the NASW page, and it was like rising from the ashes. And I was like, oh, that's even better. My cis het friends will be able to handle that, and they may actually show up. And I still validate for my friends and the people I know who can't handle it, sharing that Facebook as well. And it sucks because as being a part of the community, we're always having to accommodate other people. And this is just another accommodation. And it's sad that we have to live in the world that we have to continue to accommodate versus asking for and having those accommodations for ourselves as well. And so, you know, wanting to work through the burnout of having to always be the educators, and it's hard to meet expectations for different people. So I think the one thing that allies could really do is really step up on trainings, and not just let's answer some definitions, but actually putting together town halls like this, having listening projects, and having people come in and be a part of it, but not have to always be the one to share the story, for them to cultivate and be in a relationship with people. As a therapist, more and more I keep seeing the thing, all therapists are trauma therapists. And I agree with that. The more when you try to do this, we all are. So I wonder what it takes for training to be adequate enough that social workers can go, all social workers should actually and generally try to work towards being anti-racist and being LGBT affirming, versus this idea of saying, oh, I took a training, I know what transgender is, and I was taught not to ask you what is in your pants. And it's like, why just trying to hire somebody and trying to explore. I couldn't imagine hiring anybody who can't get past the conversations of, are you a part of the community? What is your idea of allyship? So it's really scary figuring out what trainings are available and what people are actually going to be adequate in serving and not re-traumatizing people in the community who come in and look for work.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for sharing. And something that really stood out to me is like this idea of accommodating our allies in order just to like get by, to get them in the door so that they'll listen to us. And, you know, something that I really resonate with as a person of color trying to talk to white people is this idea of palatability, that you have to be palatable so that someone's white fragility doesn't fall apart before you even, you know, get them to understand or like just listen to you. And I think that to some extent in the queer community, we always have to water ourselves down and not be not be too much in order to feel like we're approachable enough. And there are so many ways in which that's harmful just to ourselves. And like, I have always said that I came out when I was 12 and I've never stopped educating since I was 12. It has been a long road since then. And I've realized that my journey through being an educator at such a young age is trauma. So for folks who are seeing queer clients, who are working with queer social workers, like not every single social worker or queer person views it this way, but me and several others, it is a common experience to view educating the people around you to be such an exhausting task after a while that it becomes traumatizing. And that's just one of the other ways that social workers perpetuate harm towards folks of color when they ask us to do all of this free labor all the time. And what's even the cherry on top is they ask us to do this free labor while being kind to them, while putting it in a little box and giving it to them with a present and like blowing them a kiss. And that is just not me. Anyone who's heard me talk, I've been doing this since the beginning of these town halls. Anyone who's heard me talk about it, I become not a nice person when it comes about talking about allies, talking about my experiences, and I deserve to not have to be a nice person all the time. And neither does anyone else, any of the queer people in this room. They don't have to be nice when talking about their experiences, but we've trained ourselves to be that way. And for some folks, they've made the active choice to do that so that they can survive, right? If I was as honest in all the spaces that I exist in, I would not get through. I would have dropped out of college. I would have had professors fail me. Like, we do it to survive. And at some point you can decide to just be like, what, fuck it. You know, this is unacceptable for you to do it, treat me this way, and I will not let you do it. So that's just my opinion about those things. So that's my thoughts hearing you speak. I know, Taylor, you've had your hand up for a hot minute, so why don't you jump in?
Okay, thank you, Felix. So two things, because I was piggybacking off Aaron and then Nicholas, but a good thing that's happened recently, piggybacking off Aaron's discrimination of education, is the US recently passed. They're going to be reviewing the past 10 years cases of the people who were let go other than honorable discharge based on their LGBTQ. So if you know a veteran who was discharged for being LGBTQ and no other reason, they can have their file looked at so they can qualify for full VA benefits. And I think that's a really important win. And I wanted all the social workers to know that, because that is a very large discrimination. I did 6 years in the military, and I remember when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, because my unit had one of the first transgender soldiers in our area, because my area has about 6,000 people living in it, very rare rural area. And then to piggyback on what Nicholas was saying about, I forgot, he was talking about allyship, and I think we should also address allyship within the community, because there is transphobia in the community, there is biphobia, there is polyphobia, and it's really common. I today listened to a TikTok by one of the trans TikTokers I like about what it's like to date as a trans person. And I'm lucky I'm pansexual and only gender fluid, but I get similar for being polysexual, because people feel deceived, people are mad, but I don't get the level of like death threats and stuff that a trans person might get for being quote unquote deceived if they don't put trans in their bio or don't put poly in their bio. And I think that's really important to address within our community as well, that you can be in the community and you can not be an ally because you're being one of those phobias. And I think that's important to talk about. If anyone doesn't know what pansexual is, for me, it's summed up parts, not parts. I will date a trans person, I will date a cis person, I will date a gay person, a lesbian person, a gender fluid person. And for anyone that doesn't know what polysexual is, that means that me and my partner, we love each other, but no, we can get love from other people. So we might date one or two people. For my friend Joy, polysaturated is 6 people. For me, that is 2 people. And there's my little education on those sexualities from my perspective. If anyone else has questions or comments about the biphoria or the veteran thing, you can go.
Thank you for sharing, Taylor, and also thank you for that information, because it is important for everyone to know that even though we are in a place of, dealing with the oppression within our own profession, that there are things happening that are wins for our community, because it's very important to, also recognize those wins. So thank you. If anyone else wants to share an experience of the oppression that they have felt in their workplace, in an educational setting, in any aspect of social work, please feel free to open your mic and speak.
It's really hard for me not to want to just start preaching, because as I've said in the chat, I am an educator, not by profession necessarily, but I am really bad at not speaking up, which again is why I'm at my second 30-day ban on Facebook. But before I got my master's in social work, I was working for the state of Indiana as a Department of Child Services hotline worker. And I was actually fired because a cisgender white heterosexual woman reported me for sexual harassment against her. And it was completely unfounded. She put together a whole bunch of things I said to her at various points because she asked for more education and I was giving her education, and she put together little snippets to make it sound like I was hitting on her and talking about her sex life and all this different stuff. And it was they basically blacklisted me from jobs for 2 years. It wasn't until I was able to get and complete my master's degree that things opened up for me again. And that was really hard to deal with. A lot of people encouraged me to take it to the ACLU or other, lawyers, whatever, but I was so depressed after that that I didn't even have the energy to try. And so nothing was ever done with it. It was a learning experience for me. I do have to be careful sometimes. I tend to like to be very confrontational, and I pride myself on that. But just knowing that it can bite me, pretty hard. But I will say that the company I work for currently is called Groups Recover Together, and it's opioid use recovery. And we're all over the country at this point, kind of. We're in several states, I should say that. Several months ago, I was talking to my clinical director, and she was getting to know me a little bit because she had just started in that role. And I said, by the way, if there's any type of initiatives for the LGBT community or whatever within the company, let me know. I want to be a part of that. And a couple weeks later, they pulled me into a meeting with her and my supervisor. We're all virtual still. And they asked me to do a presentation for the intake team, which I'm on, to educate about the LGBT community, and specifically how drugs and more specifically opioids have affected the community. And so that was a really cool chance for me to be authentic, and I presented to about 5 different states, and they were very receptive of it. They recorded it and apparently sent it on to the CEO and the COO and CFO, who just kept passing it around. And they realized that they needed to be using pronouns in their email signatures. and it's been encouraged within the company. I find it ironic because I don't give my pronouns because it's kind of a difficult subject at this point. But we were laughing about that. But it was just really, really encouraging to finally be at a place where they accept you for who you are. There's still definitely some issues with minorities in general being underrepresented, but they care and they're trying to change it. And it's just so much different than anything I've ever experienced in the past. And it's so rare. And I hate that there are people who don't have that. And it's so just bizarre to me, so I don't know where I'm going with this now, but you have it.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing a bunch of different things. I'll go in backwards order. So first of all, thank you for sharing that you don't share your pronouns all the time, because I think that's an experience that gets erased in our community, that we do the whole like, what's your pronouns? Where are your pronouns? And for cis people, I think all cis people should have their pronouns in their bio, like go for that. But trans people are allowed to have that choice, right? The reason that we ask cis people to put their pronouns is so that it makes it more comfortable and safer for trans people. And unfortunately, it's not always safe for us to do so. The other thing I'm really glad that you shared is this success that you like, that you were feeling really good about that training and you're feeling accepted in that agency you work at, because we need to hear that too. Like in our town halls, a lot of it is like, this sucks or field sucks. And like, while that's true, there are successes and I want to celebrate that. And then the last thing is, I want to thank you for sharing your experience of with that coworker who kind of, because it reminded me of how queer folks are often targeted for being predatory, right? And we forget about it. I sometimes forget about it. And then in my life, I come across it all the time as a therapist who, and I'm going to connect a couple ideas that were talked about in the past. But people were talking about, like, is it relevant to share my identity? Why do I have to hide my identity? Unfortunately, and not unfortunately for me, I have zero choice to share my identity. It's kind of hard to tell, but I swear I have a really great puberty mustache going on because I'm on T. And because of that, everyone who sees me knows that I'm trans. If you're like just paying any bit of attention, right? So myself outs me. It's a self-disclosure that straight people don't have to worry about, cis people don't have to worry about, but everybody knows I'm queer. Everybody knows I'm trans because they can clock me, right? So I've started realizing that idea of being predatory affects my work all the time. My partner, who's also queer and also not cis, but it doesn't move through the world in the same way as I do, recently learned about psychodrama intervention, which is cool as fuck. Go look it up, right? But part of it is about like, consensually touching your client like on the shoulder, like that's part of the intervention stuff. And regardless of COVID things, I was thinking I would never touch my client. I would be so afraid of like what that would be. Even if my client was totally cool with it, there's this fear that's happening that wouldn't happen for a straight cis person, right? So I wanted to like bring that up because we practice differently because of our fear. And also like the idea that we have expectations for self-disclosure that are different than other people. For our communities are so intertwined. If you are a queer social worker working within the queer community, in my opinion, I'm going to run into people, right? it's gonna be an issue. Like I am gonna run into my clients at a party or something. Like I do not want to do that because the community is so tight. But it's just another added layer that we have to kind of navigate, that it's not the same for other folks. And for our straight cis supervisors to not understand that is what is bothersome for me. Luckily, I have a great supervisor. She's awesome. She's queer, love it. But I can imagine that I could have a supervisor that would think it's inappropriate to disclose my queerness to someone, etc. So like, I just wanted to like affirm everything you were saying and also just share like that added thing, because we often forget that and are not taught in social work school how our identities like literally can change the way that we practice. And that like, in my opinion, that queer social work rules are different than straight cis social work rules. And I mean, other people can have different opinions on that, totally welcome. But that's just how I've learned in the short time that I've started practicing. So Nicholas, I see that you have your hand up.
I agree with you. My skin color gives me away as a person of color. I'm Black, I'm mixed. And so I don't get a chance to be like, oh, by the way, I may have some different Black experiences than you. And so I'm pretty unapologetically, non-binary or gender expansive, because what's really great is it can be hard in a rural area to know who are your community. So when people look up psychology today and they're like, is there anybody who's non-binary? I'm the only non-binary person in like 100 miles. And so that gravitates people. And you're right, like being in the community, there's not a Facebook group I can join if I don't have at least 5 clients in it. So it's this idea of trying to find ways to participate in healthy self-disclosure, which as research is starting to come out showing that self-disclosure is important because the therapeutic rapport is one of the most important indicators. And it also helps with good fit. If you don't think you can handle the queer as fuck things I'm gonna say sometimes, then I may not be a good fit for you, and that's valid. And I wanna be there for the people who are. And I think that can be frustrating and safety issues as well. I have male privilege, even though I'm Black. I have male presenting privilege, even though I look a certain way. So I can only say that for myself and not anybody else from my own experiences. And then trying to lift people up, just like you said, Felix, my supervisor's cool as fuck. Great. How do we help support other queer therapists? How do we get people who are interested, who are queer, into social work, knowing that a lot of times because of the structural issues, the safety issues, the death threats, how do we get them to afford a BSW, afford an MSW, and then survive being able to do internships and shit? That's the only way I think that we have to have, I'm in West Virginia, New York town hall meeting. I'm still down to see what this is about. And we have to build that community together, but be smart and healthy with it. Because with our code of ethics, we have these guidelines of not hurting people. And it just, being in West Virginia, I love it because all my clients will come in, and if they identify as trans or if they identify as something else, they always go, I'm the only one. And I'm like, if you could see my caseload of 20 to 30 people, you are not the only one. But I can't be like, client mixer, y'all, you all need to meet each other and connect. But what does it mean to help try to find places in your community? Because here in West Virginia, we have food deserts, but we also have service deserts where if I wanted the closest P flag in this area is maybe Winchester, 20 to 30 miles away. We have a great thing called the Frederick Center that does groups and all these different things. That's another 30 miles. If I want to have that community, I have to do it. And it can just be really frustrating because we're always having to do it. So getting our numbers up, making sure that our queerness isn't what keeps people from losing resources, scholarships, opportunities, and being able to grow and be represented, I think is one of the main ways to be able to see this goodness happening.
You're giving me so much like warm and fuzzies right now. I appreciate that. And yeah, I wanted to highlight that the experiences, you know, of being not white and that as well, right? Just the idea that like is an extra layer that we're forgetting here. I think that most of the voices in this room who have talked have been white. So I wanted to call that out. And also I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a layer that a lot of white, queer, and trans people do not think about, right? The way that I move through the world, how you move through the world are going to be completely different. So I wanted to just kind of like put a pin on it and put it on the like virtual wall we have in our mind, just to make sure that everyone kind of centers that. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Taylor, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what you had said about like you being worried about coming out to your clients and stuff. And fun fact about me is I worked at a level 5 prison this past year. I'm a very well-rounded. I've been a CNA, worked at the prison. Now I work at a daycare. And the way trans people were treated at the prison and that whole spiel, and then someone knowing that I was pansexual, all the COs, which are correctional officers, fetishized me, which was super creepy. And that happens a lot I don't know if that happens to male presenting people when they come out, but I know it happens a lot to female people. And then also just speaking on cultural backgrounds too, I am white, but my significant other is Native American, and they are LGBT plus. But it's interesting to see, as being in a couple with a non-white person, we get white passing privilege because I'm with him. Like, we almost were stopped the other day at Walmart. He bought a camera, and the only reason the girl didn't stop him is I was holding the receipt. And I caught that. And that's really messed up that people of color have to worry about that. And there's other times when like he's like, you have to drive because I'm too brown to drive. And we have a shared son. And we're going to have you're brown, you have to behave like this in front of police officers talk. And that is very terrifying as a mother and a veteran, and something I recently was exposed to because of my white privilege. And I don't know if that's white shaming myself, but like maybe somebody can understand that, if that makes sense. That's my lived experience with it. But also working at the prison, I feel a lot of people have to realize the discrimination that happens to the LGBTQ community when they go in, because some people who haven't had their bottom surgery but had their top surgery are put in the male prisons. And that leads to a lot of trigger warning stuff that I won't mention here, just because I don't want anyone to be triggered. And that's something we have to consider as social workers too, especially if you're doing motivational, metaphysical, or trauma-informed therapy as well, is how there's a larger number of persons of color being profiled to go to prison. And if they are LGBT, they could be trans and put in a prison that isn't their presenting gender or is, and they're going to be harassed for it. And I think that was something I should contribute because I've worked at the prison and I don't think a lot of people know about firsthand experience doing that. That's all.
Thank you, Taylor. Does anyone else have any other experience that they would like to share?
I just wanted to speak up real quick in terms of working with people who are gender expansive. Something that's been really important that we're not talking about, or I'm not hearing it in my neck of the woods, is how when working with people who are gender expansive, there can be a lot of correlations with autism and autism spectrum disorder. And because of that, when you look that up, you go, well, how do you diagnose that in adults? That should be easy, right? And then you go, no one's doing it. No one knows how to do it. What can we even do? And so cobbling together resources, I've been able to find ways to build that myself. And I've already identified 2 or 3 clients I have who are neurodiverse, who are also identifying as, being on the gender spectrum as well. And I wonder what it's like for us to continue to recognize that we all have little shades in all these different communities. And how do we find ways to really come together, that if we're having challenges with like gay versus trans, or like non-binary versus asexual, then what does that intersection even look like when you have people who have language differences, intellectual differences? And I'm not saying deficits, like, this idea of even having the conversation where in autism we need to cure it, it's something wrong, or this is just neurologically how people are, just like many things in life. And I wonder what, the people in this town hall have any ideas of what the future may look like to integrate into that idea of how do we start screening for autism? And if you have, because people of color are put into the school to prison pipeline, and they're just behavioral disabilities without even going, maybe they don't really understand what's happening because we've got some developmental things going on. And we also see, because of high masking rates and people who identify as female or female presenting, they often go under that surface as well. And social work is a predominantly female presenting like area and space. I don't know how we rectify that and make sense of that, because it's like with autism, you screen out on one hand, maybe social pragmatic, you screen on the other, you have OCD. But what does it mean to look at people who are having a really hard time, who so happen to be on the gender binary, and then you're like, oh, well, you have depression and anxiety. Oh, and you have trichotillomania, and you had some epilepsy issues. We got to screen for autism. And then to be able to get people those accommodations so they can actually do the stuff they want to do. And that's something that's been in my sphere recently, and trying to make sense of all of that.
Thank you, Nicholas. And Tiffany, you have your hand raised.
Yes. So I guess one thing that I just thought about with what was just said is that I work for a couple, one like online platform, and then another that is like online for a primary care clinic. And I'm finding that a lot of adults, particularly, some that are LGBTQ, are coming in with potential ADHD, and there are limited resources. And, it's like I'm sitting here like, okay, let me try to find something that works, that can help you. Let's explore things together. But at the same time, who do they go to? How do they get, the diagnosis? How do they not get told, oh, you're just looking for medication? Or, even depending on what they've experienced, as a kid or as a teenager or a young adult, how has that contributed to where they are today. And so I'm like, I don't know, it's a really tricky place to be, with wanting to help, but also knowing that there are limited resources. So that is a really tricky part for me, as a person and as a social worker. And then the second piece, I don't know if this was talked about earlier because I was a little late. I worked at an inpatient facility, and we all have our, we know about those in general. But as it came to adults, it was really great, with just the respect that they got, whether they were, LGBT, they had certain pronouns or like names that were different than on the paperwork. It was great. It worked out really well with the other participants and the staff. However, when it came to the adolescents, it was a different story, because they're kids. And it's like the parents are like, well, no, their name is such and such. Whereas we, the staff, are going to talk to the kids and address them as what they want to be addressed as, whatever name they give us. It puts, it puts some strain on the kid, but also on the organization and the workers. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't work there anymore, but it's like, obviously that comes from the very tip top of these agencies, these hospitals, whatever. But then, coming down to it, it's like, this is a part of why the kid is here, and we're going to call them by the name that they would like to be called or their pronouns, but then we send them back home to where they aren't, getting that, that same respect or the same affirming language. So I think that's all I really wanted to say before I keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Taylor, you have your hand raised.
Hi. So I actually have ASD level 1, and you guys could probably see me fidgeting a little. There's quite a bit of Autism Speaks vibes going on. And as someone with ASD level 1 and my significant other having ASD level 1 or 2, there is a lot of misinformation going on about that. So screening for an autistic person is helpful, but also you want to be careful about how you present it, because my parents purposely did not get me diagnosed because I would be removed from normal classes. I would not get accurate education. Autism Speaks constantly looks for a vaccine to cure us. It's terrible. So if you're getting your information from Autism Speaks as someone with autism, please don't. They, in fact, have worked with one autistic person and they were fired within 6 months. There is a link of LGBTQ to autism that the Autism Advocacy Network, which is a great organization to get information from, helps. And also keep in mind, in America, it's actually still legal to use shock therapy on autistic people. And there is a lot of terrifying things for autistic people. So a lot of people don't want to come forward about being autistic. And the screening and the way it's being talked about is really disheartening to me, because I have a CNA license. I have worked as a daycare assistant. My significant other has done all these jobs as well. We're very capable individuals, even at level 1 and 2. And we've even worked in autistic transitional homes. And because of Autism Speaks and how some of the people were presenting their information, I have people that could be on the same level as me that were wrongfully put into mental hospitals and still to this day cannot use the toilet by themselves. And that's something that's really traumatic for the autistic community. So try to reach out to an autistic person or look up the National Autistic Advocacy Group, anywhere but Autism Speaks, basically, to get your information about autism. Sorry, I kind of tismed there. Thank you.
Thank
That-
you, Taylor.
That's no problem at all. My daughter has autism. My partner has autism. And then, of course, as I was doing all these assessments, I put in there a place. Somebody just opened up an organization in the last 6 months in Canada where they put out the autism quotient. They put out the CATS-Q. And what's great is they actually put the data and the corresponding articles, the research articles, where you can see the methodology, you can see how big the sample sizes are and what all these questions connect to. And what's great about it is it goes away from Autism Speaks is this deficits and cure model, whereas the Autism Self-Advocacy Network is more of a for us, by us, where it's actually about having people on their boards and their connections to it. And I even found for myself that doing these assessments and working with all these different folks, I find myself, I actually have a doctor's appointment tomorrow morning at 8:30. It's a normal scheduled appointment. And I'm going to walk in there and go, I've started doing assessments for our people with autism. And I think I may have autism. And I want to see what it's now like for my clients to have to go through this process and have an open mind so that I can figure out where are these deficits and what I can do to support more people. Because adults are just left undiagnosed, and then you blame it on so many other different things. And I mean, it really does intersect with gender and sexuality, and it cannot be left on the table. And it constantly is, and it's really frustrating. Thanks for letting me speak.
To comment on what Nicholas was saying, a good way to think about autism and gender is think of it as a color wheel, because that linear spectrum does not apply anymore. I am a lot more autistic in my social cues ability than I am in my working ability, as where other people have different views on, like my significant other has way higher anxiety on the color wheel of autism. And then me being a gender fluid person, I can identify like super, super pink one day and then as female, and then super blue another day, and then super red, which is a mixed day. I think that that's the best way to look about it, because a lot of people look as both gender and autism as this linear line, and it can be percentages of a color wheel or a pie chart. And that's a lot better way to look at it.
Thank you, Taylor and Nicholas. That was really great dialogue and very important information that you shared with everyone. And I just wanted to let everyone know that we appreciate that information and the links that you posted in the chat as well, Nicholas. So every town hall and every special interest group, we typically end the town hall or interest group with a deep breathing exercise for everyone to do together as a collective breath, as a way to know that what we've done can sometimes be very emotional and triggering for individuals, and that to reestablish that this is a brave space for everyone and that we're exiting back into our everyday life, and to be collective and have some self-care. So typically how we do this collective breath is we breathe in on a count of 3, we hold for a count of 3, and then we release for a count of 3 together as a group. So everyone let out the breath that they have now. And then inhale, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, and release, 2, 3. And thank you everyone for coming this evening. Again, next week will be the special interest group that'll be held on Tuesday night. The link was posted earlier in the chat, and it's also on the NSAW New York State website if you're interested in attending. We're also looking for leaders who would also like to facilitate different conversations to come and reach out to NSAW New York State, and we can talk about getting you to facilitate some of these town halls. So if anyone's interested, please reach out as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. If I said NSAW, I'm sorry, it's been a really long day. It's NSAW. Just us again.
Right. Yeah, let me pause 1 second. Am I
Yeah.
muted?
Hello, and welcome to From the Ashes We Rise, our series of town halls that seeks to identify problems and issues of oppression perpetuated within the profession of social work towards LGBTQ plus individuals. Thank you for being here. Before we go into the ground rules, I would like to address some concerns as well as preface this conversation. First, as with all of our town halls, we welcome everyone to this brave space. This space will be used to amplify the voices of LGBTQ plus social workers to speak about their experiences within the profession of social work. If you identify as cisgender and heterosexual, we do welcome you in this space. However, we kindly request that you remain on mute for this evening. If you would like to offer some messages of support to your LGBTQ plus colleagues who share their experiences, you may do so using the chat function. This space is not going to be used to re-traumatize LGBTQ plus individuals. Secondly, I would like to address the post that NSAW recently shared, which generated some controversy. The posts that we make are typically direct quotes from LGBTQ plus social workers who've previously attended our town halls. In the post, it stated, social work harms LGBTQ plus students, clients, and communities. While we recognize that there are social workers who are addressing the issues of LGBT equality outside of the profession, there has not been a satisfactory movement to address the oppression within social work schools, places of employment, and within NSAW, CSWE, and ASWB. There were a lot of positive support and messages from social workers, but there were also negative comments, social workers who are unwilling to listen or to work through their own uncomfortability, or to even acknowledge that there are systemic issues within the profession regarding LGBTQ plus individuals. To that I say, if you are uncomfortable with our messaging, good, you should be. Every day, LGBTQ plus social workers advocate for issues that are not related to LGBTQ rights, and every day, LGBTQ plus social workers and individuals are discriminated against, attacked, oppressed, murdered, violated, and mutilated simply for being who we are. The bare minimum we are asking the social work profession to do is get uncomfortable and listen to the LGBTQ plus social workers who are saying there is a problem here. In other words, check your privilege. And if you can't do that, I would seriously question why you are uncomfortable and why you are so resistant and hesitant when LGBTQ plus individuals are sharing their experiences and demanding change. Furthermore, we feel that NSAW National did not really like this post and wanted to change the messaging behind that post. And frankly, to pose it as a question to further discussion within membership. And this is not really a question. These are experiences that people are having. They're legitimate. And we're not willing to lessen the experiences that the LGBT community is having, nor are we going to change messaging because it makes cisgender and heterosexual social workers uncomfortable. When you're when LGBT social workers are telling you there is a problem, the onus is on social workers to fix the behaviors and issues within the profession, not on the disenfranchised community group to change its message. We will not be silent or be swept under the rug, so messaging can be placed over people that are supposed to be the people you're supposed to protect and serve. That is, in and of itself, oppression and exactly the types of issues we are discussing in these forums. Our ground rules and the principles of our community is that we recognize that we must strive to overcome historical and divisive biases such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia in our society. We acknowledge that we are all systematically taught misinformation about our own groups and about members of other groups. And this is true for everyone, regardless of the groups we belong to. We agree not to blame ourselves or others for the misinformation we have learned, but to accept responsibility for not repeating misinformation after we have learned otherwise. We agree to listen respectfully to each other without interruptions. Only one person speaks at a time. However, this does not mean we should ignore problematic statements. We can and should address those statements with care and respect, with the goal of helping each other learn. We acknowledge that we may be at different stages of learning on the content and discussion topics. We agree that no one should be required to or expected to speak for their whole race, gender identity, or sexual orientation. We can't, even if we tried. Everyone has come to the table to learn, grow, and share. We will trust that people are doing the best that they can. We all make mistakes and have bad days. When these occur, let's challenge and encourage each other to do better. We acknowledge once again that we may be at different stages of learning on the topic. Share responsibility for including all voices in the discussion. So if you're like me and have a tendency to dominate discussions, take a step back and help the group invite others to speak. If you tend to stay quiet, challenge yourself and to share ideas so others can learn from you. We are experienced facilitators, but do not claim to be experts. We are here to help facilitate the process. Along with everyone in the group, we are here to learn. We also recognize that everyone has an opinion. Opinions, however, are not the same as informed knowledge backed up by research. Depending on the topic and context, both are valid to share, but it's important to know the difference. To engage in deep learning, we will want to lean more towards informed knowledge and gain practice reflecting and speaking thoughtfully on difficult topics. It's okay not to know everything. Keep in mind that we are all still learning and are bound to make mistakes when approaching a complex task or exploring new ideas. Be open to changing your mind and to make space for others to do so as well. It is also important to acknowledge that LGBTQ people and individuals are not responsible to be your own personal Google. In other words, do your own research. With that being said, we will open the forum with a moment of silence for the LGBTQ+ individuals who've been violently murdered, especially queer, trans people of color, who in this year is already on track to beating the record of the previous past 5 years. We break the silence by acknowledging that we are here to do better, and that starts by being uncomfortable. And with that being said, I would like to open up discussion. How did you feel about the post that was made advertising this town hall and the comments that you saw underneath it, both positive and negative?